if death could be avoided, no king would have died. So I said, I'm not thinking of myself, I've got a plot. But what about city of Lahore? They come with a good intention, but then they feel they are gods.
Assalamu alaikum ji, I'm Sulaiman Shahid, a faculty member at LUMS. Today we'll be talking to Babar Saab about public duties, Syed Babar Ali Foundation and his philosophy of giving. Assalamu alaikum Babar Saab, thank you very much for your time. Babar Saab, today is our 13th episode and we'll be closing your book with this episode on public duties. How was this journey?
I think everything added on to what little I was able to contribute in the public sector and in the social sector. So it's a culmination of so many things which I found very satisfying.
So Babar Saab, let me begin with Sweden, the country which is very close to your heart because of the Rousing family. And one of the first assignments you have taken as a public duty was becoming the Honorary Consul General. How was that journey?
It's very rewarding because here you were dealing not with the business world, you were dealing with the diplomatic world of Sweden. It was a learning experience because the Swedes are formal and yet very informal in the sense that they don't stand on any ceremony. I'll give you an example. I was very interested to set up a technical institute to train young people in various skills, motor mechanic, air conditioning, workshop manufacture, electrical engineering. This is for where people, young boys with matriculation would spend 3 years, equivalent to your various technical institutes. But I thought that Sweden was way ahead and we could learn from the Swedes. So I approached the Swedish government's foreign aid agency called Swede Fund.
Okay.
And I asked them, I said, we'll put up the land, we'll put up the building, we will buy all the equipment that's available in Pakistan. And we would like to, I said, we'll start with 5 different disciplines. And we would like you to send us 5 teachers, 1 in each discipline, and such equipment that is not available in Pakistan. And we would like to set up this institute as a model institute so that others can follow. And during the various discussions with them, I met the head of the Swedish aid agency. He had come to Pakistan, I showed him around. And I was in Sweden, I was visiting him, and he invited me to lunch the next day. So I went to his office. His office was on the main street called Kungsgatan in Stockholm, and number 10 Kungsgatan. I went there and he said, let's go for lunch. He said, I had met the Prime Minister the previous evening at a reception. There was a foreign dignitary, and you know, the Prime Minister, Mr. Erlander, had visited Lahore when I started LUMS, packages. And he visited packages with his wife, and so he knew of me. So he said, this gentleman, his name was Bernberg. So he said, he knew that I knew the Prime Minister, and the Prime Minister had heard of me, had met me on his visit to Lahore. He said, what's happening tomorrow? He said, I'm taking him to lunch. He said, I'll come and join you for lunch. So he took me to a very famous restaurant in Stockholm called Opera Shallen.
Okay.
So we arrived there, and there was a table for 3 people. The 2 of us sat down, and 10 minutes later, the Prime Minister walked in and he joined us. So it showed, you know, and the Prime Minister's office was only about a block away. It showed the informality. There was nobody to announce the arrival of the Prime Minister. He just walked in. He said, do you know, the Prime Minister of Sweden doesn't have an official car.
Wow.
I had to walk from my office to this restaurant. So this is what one learned from being, and of course, when any Swedish dignitary came to Lahore, I had to take care of them, and so it was a very interesting experience.
But it was also for 37 years. It's a very long time.
Yeah, so longest period. I mean, their official limit was 70 years.
Yeah.
But they were so happy. They said, "Do you mind to continue?" And I said, "Fine." And then when I finally said, "And it's time for me to hang up my gloves," I was invited back to Sweden, and I was asked to go and meet the king, because I was representing him here, and he was very kind enough to thank me and all that.
So Babar Sahib, you also received 2 awards, the Knights and the Commander one.
Yeah.
Tell us about that.
Well, I didn't know that they had such a, though officially today no Swede gets any award today. They have abolished it.
Okay.
It's only for foreigners that they want to recognize. And the first one came in within the first 10 years, and the second award, which is of a higher order, came in, I think, 2 or 3 years before I retired. So this was without my asking. It's a part of their protocol or their way of recognizing your service.
Okay. Excellent. Babar Sahib, you also worked for UN or with UN and represented Pakistan. Tell us your journey about UN, especially in 1947.
Well, the 47 one was just, I just finished my studies at the University of Michigan, and I was preparing to come back, and my father wrote to me. He said, Pakistan's first delegation to the United Nations is going to go to New York, and I think you should delay your departure, because he had requested Sir Zafarullah Khan, who was the head of the delegation. He said that Babar is in New York, is in America. If you need any extra person to carry your bags around, he's available. And my father thought this would be a good exposure for me. And Sir Zafarullah was a very old friend of the family. I'd known him from childhood, and he was he was chosen by the Quaid-e-Azam to represent Pakistan before the Radcliffe mission, on the Boundary Commission.
Absolutely.
To decide the boundary of Pakistan. He said that there's nobody more competent to plead Pakistan's case. And I didn't know about it at that time, but Sir Zafarullah told me when I met him. When he arrived in Lahore to prepare the brief, the Punjab Muslim League, which was headed by Nawab Mamdot, had done no preparation work at all. There was no office, there was no secretariat. So my father then put his own house at his disposal, which became the headquarters for the Boundary Commission. We provided the secretarial work and all the other support, because the Punjab Muslim League office was purely on paper. They were all
Nothing.
They all were office holders without any responsibility. But my father was a meticulous person, and he said, "We will provide you all the support that you required." And so Sir Zafarullah mentioned this to me, and he said, that my father was very supportive of anything that he required to prepare his case to go before Radcliffe.
And then I think this journey continued, and then
Yeah.
1969.
So later on,
Yeah.
you see, in 1969, I was this was during martial law.
Exactly. Yeah.
And
You were a part of the delegation.
I was member of the delegation. Each province had sent a delegate.
Yeah.
So I was representing Punjab at the UN. And they put me on second committee, which is on economic affairs
Yes.
at the UN. And that again was a very good experience. And I was there for 3 months. And some people of the Secretariat, UN Secretariat, had noticed my participation. So a few years later, the UN General Assembly set up a commission to prepare a code of conduct for transnationals. You see, what had happened was that there was an overthrow of regime in Chile. Allende, who was a leftist president, he, through American pressure and the multinationals there, there was an agitation, drummed up agitation to throw him out. And a new regime which was favorable to the Americans and to the private sector was brought in. So the Eastern Bloc, the Russians and people from Eastern Bloc, put up a huge complaint at the United Nations that these multinationals are now changing regimes around the world. So they passed a resolution to prepare a code of conduct for the multinationals as to how they would conduct their business outside their home country.
Okay.
So I was then asked to be a member of this commission. And so I served on that for 6 years, and that was a very interesting experience to go to New York and also to travel around countries which had complained and to learn from them as to learn about the shenanigans of the multinationals, and then come and debate about it, and then try and prepare a code of conduct which would be enforced by the United Nations. That was a good experience.
Excellent. Babar Sahib, in 1969, it was the first time that environment was also discussed.
Yeah.
And you were very happy that it has been discussed at this level. Didn't continue at that well, but I think that was a good starting point.
That was the first time.
Yeah.
And I still remember this lady who was the Minister of Environment from the Netherlands.
Okay.
She was sitting there and she said, you know, back in The Hague, this glass of water that is lying before me, we are told that this has been drunk 7 times before. So that was the nature of the recycling of wastewater in the Netherlands in 1969. And when I came back, I was on my way back to Pakistan, I stopped over in London. And I had a friend who worked in the city of London. He was a civil engineer from Pakistan. I knew his brother. He was with me in Michigan. This fellow's name was Muhammad Ali. And I told Muhammad Ali, I said, I heard this from this lady from the Netherlands. He said, Babar bhai, it's no different in London. We are also recycling water here, wastewater, which goes back into the tap which people drink.
Indeed, and I can tell you from my experience in Netherlands that tap water was the best water, you know,
Yeah.
and I think
I believe in some of the European countries it's mandatory that the quality of tap water has to be potable.
Yes, and you don't want to buy mineral water because the tap water is of good quality. Babar Sahib, coming to now Pakistan, and one of the topics you have discussed in many episodes is this National Fertilizer Corporation. You had 2 options, either Babar Ali would be nationalized or packages would be nationalized. And then of course Babar Ali got nationalized for about 4 or 5 years. What do you think, that's one of your key service to the government and to Pakistan. What are the long-term and short-term effects of your service to under this rule?
Well, I mean, it's very difficult because government have a very short memory. I mean, everything that a certain regime does, the next regime tries to erase it right away. And this was Mr. Bhutto's time, and he had nationalized many industries, and he, at that time, the civil service of Pakistan, the civil servants in Islamabad were still very competent, open-minded, and they knew who was what, where in Pakistan in the private sector. So they went and with permission from Mr. Bhutto and the government of that time, went and tapped people in Burma Shell, ICI, British Petroleum, some of these large companies, to see if their chief operating officers could be released to go and work for the government. And I must say that these companies were very willing to let these people go, because they had a very competent hierarchy the next man could easily take over. So I was picked up because Mr. Bhutto had seen me before, as you know, he came to packages to guys to get some roses. But his people knew me quite well. And I must tell you, when I went for the final interview and I said, all right, I'll come and join you, I asked Mr. Awan, who was the Secretary of Production, a very competent person who had known me for many years. He and I had served on board for Tourist Corporation once. He was at that time Chief Secretary, Balochistan. And I asked him, I said, who's going to call the shots in this corporation? He said, you will call the shots. So I said, all right, then I'll define what a shot is. So I won't come to you to tell me what I can do and what I can't do.
Yeah.
And I can tell you, Suleiman, that the 4 years I was there, nobody ever questioned me as to what I did and why I did it, except for one very small instance,
This is
which I'll
very
tell you.
rare. Very rare.
You know, I was given $500 million. I was given a free hand, what technology to do, what technology to buy, where the plant will come from, who to employ. There was a very interesting incident. We were buying phosphate rock from the frontier government, from the Sarhad Development Authority. And the procedure was very cumbersome. The rock samples would go to Peshawar for analysis, and then our people to decide whether it was fit for our use or not for our superphosphate plant, which we had at Janawala and Lalpur in those days. So I told them, I said, we'll set up a laboratory in Abbottabad. So I wanted to cut down the timing and, you know, a quick decision whether this was fit or not. And I said, we will set up our own laboratory and we'll put in 2 chemists there, plus an assistant. So the laboratory went into action. 3 months later, my finance manager came to me. He said, you started this with 3 people. Now it's up to 15 people. I mean, the government, you know, thinks they breed like rabbits. So I said, shut it down. And of course, these people who were used to government service and all their perks and all their rights, they sent a mile-long telex to the minister that the chairman has been very harsh and he has put us out of a job. So Mr. Rafi Raza, who was the minister, he called me up. He said, "You've done this?" I said, "Yes." "Why didn't you ask me?" I said, "I didn't ask you because you would have prevented me from doing it." So he took it. I mean, I said, this was my authority, I've done it. That's it.
And he was fine with this.
Yeah.
Babar Sahib, one thing we've been thinking about a lot is about PIDC. NFC craved out of PIDC, but PIDC did not continue as in the way it should have. It was a great project. Where did it fail?
Well, I tell you, I mean, I was totally aware, and I was, I knew when PIDC was established, Pakistan Industrial Development Corporation. This was the brainchild of Mr. Ghulam Farooq, who was a very innovative and a far-sighted administrator. He came from Bengal Nagpur Railways. He was a railway man.
Okay.
You know, in those days, the very best people were recruited by the railway companies of India. And Mr. Ghulam Farooq was one of them. And when the railways of India were nationalized, you know, initially they were all private companies, including the Northwest Railway here in the north, and you had Great India Peninsula Railway, GIP, and East India Railway, and Bengal Nagpur Railway, and Madras Southern Maratha Railway, and
as independent companies?
As independent companies. BBCIR, Bombay, Baroda, Central India Railway, you know, all the entire network was divided between 8 or 10 different companies, and they were independent companies, very well run, officially because they were private companies working for profit, and the government provided them ability to get the land to lay out the rails, and of course they had the monopoly. The great damage that the North-Western Railway did to Pakistan, to northern India's economy, was that all our rivers were navigable, and they put the condition that no ships will ply anymore. So, ships could come up to Lahore, and during Akbar's time, I was reading the other day that a 20-ton ship was made in Lahore to be launched in Ravi. From here it went all the way to Thatta. And then they made sure that all the barrages that were constructed in such a way that there was no ship passage.
Okay.
So
it was intentionally done.
Yes, it was. This is part of the exploitation by the British. There was the trade between Central Asia and the rest of the world was through the Indus. Through Kabul River, they come to Peshawar, and down the Indus, through Kabul River to Indus River, all the way to Thatta, and from Thatta they would go international traffic. In those days, it was all sailing boats. So this was the big price that India had to pay for the railway network, which the British put in for their own security purposes. They could move troops around if there was any trouble anywhere. Anyway, Mr. Ghulam Farooq became the ultimate, before partition, or soon after partition, he opted to stay on in India, and he became number 2 in Delhi, number 2 in the Indian Railway Board, which was the highest ranking position.
Kind of vice chairman.
Under the chairman.
Under the chairman.
And I shouldn't be saying so. When the position came for being the chairman, he was passed over. And he was accused. In those days, Pakistan was getting all their coal from India to run the railways. So he was accused by the bigoted Hindus in the Indian Secretariat that Mr. Ghulam Farooq is allowing these wagons to go to Pakistan and is not taking them back. And this was told to me by Sir Siri Ram, who was a very good friend of the family. And he said Ghulam Farooq brought a file to him to sort of counter this argument. He said he had written to the government of India that we should stop Pakistan supplying coal to them because they're not sending back our wagons.
Oh.
But even then, they would not appoint him. And it was then Mr. Ghulam Muhammad, who was Minister of Finance, he then told Farooq, who he had known from a long time ago, he said, Farooq, it's time for you to come to Pakistan.
Okay.
So he migrated to Pakistan. He belonged to the frontier province. So he moved back to Pakistan, and Pakistan readily embraced him and appointed him as Additional Secretary, Ministry of Industries. And he was a man of great thought. He said, Pakistan neither has the resources, financial resources, nor the mental resources to put up industry.
Human resources.
So he suggested that the government of Pakistan should put up 2 industrial corporations, PIDC West Pakistan and PIDC East Pakistan, to put up industry, and then once these are running, we sell it to the private sector.
Excellent.
And he then recruited people on merit. He knew the best Muslim industrial managers in India. He brought them over to set up the Karnafuli paper mills, to set up the Amangad board mills, paper mills in Naushera, Sethi paper mills, board mills in Gujranwala. Similarly, other industry, brought the best people from India and locally recruited them. So when I inherited NFC,
from PIDC.
there were the fertilizer plants that existed already, one in Lalpur and Janawala, and one in Daudh Khel.
Okay.
He set up this city of industry in Daudh Khel, near Miawali, where he put up the fertilizer plant, he put up a cement factory, and he put up a pharmaceutical factory there, financed by the government. And I found that all these people were highly motivated, honest, competent. So I didn't have to send even one person out that I inherited from BIDC, but it was very small group.
A focused group.
And through them and with their help, we were able to recruit hundreds of people, both technical, marketing, financial, to man the other factories that we had put up, and we enlarged the factories. So I had a lot of respect for Mr. Farooq and for PIDC people. It was very well run. But then you see what happened was that after Mr. Bhutto, the politicians found this as a playground of putting in their relatives in the nationalized industry. And that brought in the rot. And some of the best managers left the public sector to join the private sector, because meanwhile, private sector had started setting up cement factories, fertilizer plants. So
this is post-nationalization.
Yeah, but they were always looking back in the fertilizer industry to the days that we were together in the fertilizer corporation.
Yeah, I think that's a great journey and an excellent outcome. Babar Sahab, we see in your life that you did not accept these governmental public responsibilities easily. There was a lot of effort taken to convince you that take that position or that position. And I was reading in your book, and I read this call from Gurmani Sahab mentioning, Babuji, I have found out and I'm very happy. This is what I expected of you. Tell us about this call.
You know, he knew, I don't know how, that every time I was summoned to President Zia's office, he would know of it. And this time Ziaul Haq had called me, and this was sort of the third or fourth attempt by him, where he asked me to go to Washington as the ambassador. And that time I had just started on this project of setting up the milk industry here for UHT milk, long life milk, which was developed by Tetra Pak.
Tetra Pak, okay.
By the Rousing family. So I told Ziaul Haq, I said, I've gone to the World Bank, they have agreed to finance it. And if I take on this job, this new industry, nobody else will put it up in Pakistan, because nobody interested in milk. They want to put up a fertilizer plant or a sugar mill or a textile mill. This is not a very, sexy project. And I must say, he didn't hold it against me. He said, all right, if you think that you can serve Pakistan better by putting up the milk plant rather than going as an ambassador, I said, you can find anybody to go to Washington. So he then, Nawaz Sahab somehow picked it up. He called me up and he said, I'm delighted that you said no to him, because he was very much against Ziaul Haq. He said, I expected this from you.
Babar Sahab, you said no to many prime ministers. You refused governmental positions, ministerial positions, but finally agreed to serve with Moin Qureshi. Why did you say no to him first? Why did you agree? And did you regret?
No, I mean, it was such a short, but I tell you, I've known Mr. Moin Qureshi. I knew him at least 30 years prior to his coming as the Prime Minister, because every time I went to Washington, I always sought out Pakistanis who were in Washington, and Mr. Moin Qureshi was a very important functionary in the World Bank. So he called me up when he took over in the middle of the night. I don't know why. I mean, that's the time he could find. And he said, I want you to be the finance minister. So I said, no, I'm not available. So the next day again, midnight, he called me up. And then I told him, I said, I'll come to Islamabad and tell you why. So on the third day, I went to Islamabad. And he had invited to his office Mr. Fateh Khan Bandial, who was Justice Umar Bandial's father, who was a very dear friend of mine. So he escorted me into Mr. Moin Qureshi's office, and he said, you know, I'm not well. I've had cancer, and I could not say no to government of Pakistan because it was a call of duty. Ever since I've come here in the last 3 days, I have found out that the financial position of the country is very bad. I can't do it alone. If I can come from 10,000 miles to serve Pakistan for 90 days, you can't travel 200 miles from Lahore to come and serve this country for 90 days. I can't do it alone, and I know that you and I can do it together. So I said, I'm in.
Babar Sahab, I was thinking about this journey, and I was also thinking that very often we talk about that if you want to bring a big change in Pakistan, you have to work with the government, within the government, to bring the change. Why did you not think about this? To become a part of the government, to go up in the government, maybe get the highest possible position as a prime minister, and then bring the change?
No, I mean, because I'm not a politician, I have no political backing at all. And you don't want to be a nominated, functionary. The other thing, the 4 years I was there in the public sector, and the 90 days I was there with Moin Qureshi, I saw the inner thinking and working of the people in government, the bureaucrats. I mean, I had very little to do with politicians. Nobody likes the people from the public sector. They are very jealous of them. They feel that they are rich beyond their competence, and they have enriched themselves on the basis of this country. But now the tables have turned. The politician today is much richer than the businessman.
Yeah.
He is accountable to nobody. He doesn't work at all. He puts a price on everything that he does. And so the bureaucrat now is in partnership with the politician. So he says that why should I let the politician make money? Why cannot I be a part of the loot? So the whole system has today become topsy-turvy.
But very often people bring this point that if people like you wouldn't do it, who would do it? And we also hear this thing again and again, that maybe this is this fear of failure while working in the government that put people away.
No, it's not a question of failure. It's a question of what authority do you have? You must have a legal authority. The army declares martial law, where they are the law unto themselves. And in the beginning, I was there to witness the first martial law, which was only for a few days in Lahore, during Azam Khan's time.
Yeah.
Then there was Ayub Khan's martial law, Yahya Khan's martial law, then
Zia's.
Then Bhutto's martial law.
You think that's...
Bhutto had all the authority of a martial law administrator. Then, of course, Ziaul Haq's martial law. Then Musharraf's martial law. I've seen them all. And they come with a good intention, but then they feel they are gods. And people make them feel that they are a god. And so they get totally drunk with power. They have totally forgotten as to why they took the first step. They took the first step to come and clean it up. And you find that as they stay on in power, they make a bigger mess than what they had come to clean up. Each one of them. I never had the opportunity to meet, well, I met General Ayub and Bhutto and, of course, Ziaul Haq. But Musharraf was the person that wanted me a part of his team.
Yes, you mentioned.
And I, of course, told him that I was too old and I was not prepared. They asked me to be the governor of Punjab. And I said, you should never have a Punjabi serving as a governor in Punjab because it's totally unfair to the individual because he has so many relatives and friends and he cannot be impartial. So that was my advice to Musharraf. But then he asked me to go and see him when I was abroad when this happened. And I went to see him and I told him, I said, you will never become legitimate. Don't go after legitimacy and pass laws that you are kosher. It will never happen. And you should prepare yourself today. I saw him on the 29th of October. He had taken over on the 12th.
12th of October, yeah.
So this is within 17 days of his taking over. I said, prepare yourself now how to go back to the barracks with honor and dignity for yourself and the army. So I told him, I said, you'll never become legitimate, you have to get out. And hold elections, bring in the next man, win a fair election. Of course.
We have seen the history.
The rest is
So it's not about the failure, it's really about the right power.
No,
and
the
the
greed,
framework
the
is-
greed
Yeah, it's not
that
in
you
place.
become indispensable. The country will. I remember going to Islamabad one day. I knew Mr. Sartaj Aziz very well. He was the Minister of Finance. And I knew Mr. Ghulam Ishaq Khan. I knew him when he was a fairly junior bureaucrat in the frontier government. So I knew him, kept up. And I went to Sartaj Aziz, he was the finance minister. I said, it's time for you to tell Mr. Ghulam Ishaq Khan that he should go home. He has outstayed his usefulness as the president of the country. Mulk baith jayega. The country will collapse without him. That was the attitude of everybody who served under a political head.
Nobody builds institutions.
It's happening the same thing today.
Babar Sahab, now let's move back to your social work. And one of the projects you also contributed to is Shalamar Hospital. Tell us about that hospital. Absolute great timing, excellent location, and the role of Chaudhry Nazar Sahab in that.
Well, you know, the whole idea of this Shalamar Hospital, it started off as a business hospital trust.
Okay.
That was the foundation. And Chaudhry Nazar Muhammad was the person who thought of it. And as I was very close to him, I had invited him to be a founding member of LUMS.
Okay.
And otherwise too, he was my elder. I used to go and visit him very regularly. And he said, we wanted to set up a hospital. I said, it's a very good idea. I'll collaborate with you. He said, I've already, you see, he was very closely related, not blood-wise, but business-wise to Chaudhry Fazl Ali, who was the president of Mr. Bhutto's time. And he had arranged, through Chaudhry Fazl Ali's influence, for the railway to lease this land, which belonged to the railway where the hospital is. And he said, I've got the land, I'll need money. I said, I'll join you with that. And this is how the whole thing started. And I left it to him, but gave him my old ideas. I didn't know much about medicine, but we started off as a hospital, and he and his family have been running it ever since. And I've given them whatever support I can.
And it is doing very well, and
Yeah,
especially
And
now
of
it
course
has become
they now have a hospital.
hospital.
They've got a nursing school. They've got
yeah.
a school for medical sciences. They've got a physiotherapy
Yeah.
or branch. No, they are doing a good job. It's a modest hospital. You see, the problem that has happened over the years is that the medical profession here has also become very callous. they are the people who know about life and death more than anybody else. And they are the most callous people when it comes to treating a sick person. They give 2 to 3 minutes to a patient to diagnose his problems. They write medicines, 5 different medicines, hoping that one will work. So callous about the whole thing. It is over procedures, have a blood test whether it's needed or not, take a surgical procedure whether it is not required. So it's become so money-minded. It's sickening. They are the people who should be most conscious of the fact that one day they have to die also.
They've seen death very closely.
They have seen it, but they are the ones who think that they will never die. I remember a very interesting experience I had. When I grew up, our family doctor was Dr. Yar Muhammad Khan. He belonged to the Jalandhar clan, Imran Khan's mother's side and all that. And he was superintendent of the medical hostel at King Edward Medical College. He was our family doctor. We used to go and see him and all that. He treated me like his own family member. Very fine gentleman. And his wife passed away. And my father and I went to condole. And I must say, he was so pragmatic. He said, Shah Sahab, addressing my father, that death is inevitable. If death could be avoided, no king would have died. So this is how he was consoling himself and us, that his wife, they did best, but she had to go. But today's doctors don't look at that. They think that they're going to live forever.
And I think that's why there is a need to put more money and right infrastructure and system in place
you need
for teaching
more human beings.
human beings.
3 days ago, a very good friend of mine who has retired as a frontier bureaucrat, he came to see me. He retired as chairman of WAPDA. And he said, I'm in Lahore, I want to come and see you. So he came to see me. He said one of the most kind of respected people he ever met was a foreign lady who had worked in the leper colony in Karachi, and then I think they had a branch in the frontier. And he said, I've never seen a better human being than her. And he said, before she passed away, he was with her and he said, what do you think is the failing in Pakistan? One word: they don't tell the truth. He said, I've been here for 50 years and this is one major failing in Pakistanis, is they are away from truth. And this is something that, at LUMS, when the students ask me, how would you rate a student from LUMS? And I say, this boy or girl will never tell a lie. I'm working on that.
That's a standard. Babar Sahab, in your book, you very briefly talk about your support for Lahore School of Economics. And that one paragraph was not only remarkable, but also refreshing. And I'll tell you why. LSE started at the same place where LUMS started, and you supported that at the time when LUMS was still establishing its brand. Why would you support your own competition?
Because I knew that the country needed many more LUMS. And here was somebody who were putting their own family money in. And if I could give them little support and little advice, guidance, because they were all newcomers. Syed Chaudhry, I knew his uncle very well. Mahmud Khan Chaudhry, he was a policeman and his father, of course, was a military man. I had a lot of time for Mac Chaudhry, Mahmood Ali Khan Chaudhry.
Okay.
He was married into my favorite or my great benefactor at Edson College. He was married to his niece. So I had that kind of soft corner for him. And it was the family money going in. I said, if I can in any way help them make few mistakes and get started, I'd be very, and I'm still on their managing committee and board, and I take a lot of interest. I go there, I keep on giving them whatever advice I can, and they're doing a very good job.
I think so too, because I think that's an excellent addition in Lahore.
Yeah, no, very happy.
Very happy. They're doing.
You know, you would be surprised that 90% of all the competition that came up against packages was set up by packages employees. And I never had any grounds against them.
Very nice.
We have to do better. And I wish them well. They are still my friends. In fact, next week I'm having a Zoom call with 40 of them who have retired, and they're spread all over the world. And many of them have gone and set up competition against packages. They want to talk to me, and I'm going to talk to them.
Your competition keeps you on your toes.
Yeah,
keeps you running.
yeah. And that the world is large enough.
Yeah. Babar Sahab, there was a very interesting statement in the book. And my question is about that statement. Shah Sahab, you're still very young. Why have you started thinking about this? And my question is about this Bagh-e-Rahmat graveyard. How that project came to your mind?
You know, my family elders are buried in Miani Sahib.
Yeah.
And my grandfather had bought a plot there. He's buried there. He died in 1900. And my father, you know, we large clan from my father's side. So that plot got filled up, and my father bought another plot about long before partition in a place called Gulbadan's Bagh. Gulbadan, I think, was the keep of Ranjit Singh.
Okay.
And he allotted a certain garden to her. And that is now part of Miani Sahib. So I go to the graveyard every Sunday.
You mentioned that.
To go and pray at my brother's grave. And I saw that, Miani Sahib is filled up. So I talked to Chaudhry Nazar Muhammad. I said, I have no problem about my family getting buried or me getting buried. I have a plot. But what about people who don't have it? Let's think in terms of a public graveyard. And I had a very good friend in Mian Nasir Ahmad. He had just retired as a senior bureaucrat.
From Board of Revenue.
Board of Revenue. I went to him. He said it's a very good idea. So he called in a person from the Revenue Board. He called in a lawyer. And but when I first mentioned it to Chaudhry Nazar Muhammad, he said, Shah Sahab, are you thinking of this? I said, I'm not thinking of myself. I've got a plot. But what about city of Lahore? And today, tens of thousands, thousands of people have been buried at Bagh-e-Rahmat. And it's a great source of peace to many of the citizens who didn't have a place for their lost ones.
Yeah. And you also extended that with a beautiful mosque.
Yeah.
And also there is an elderly home also managed by Chaudhry Nazar Sahab.
Yeah. But that home will be demolished one day, because when the graveyard needs the space, I've told them, I said, you can have a home, but this has to be taken away when we need the place for graves. And for the mosque, I was at that time member of the syndicate at the UET. So I said, is there a young architect here? And they produced a person by the name of Javed. I think that was the name.
The guy from MIT?
MIT.
Yeah.
And I said, tell me about yourself. He won't mention it, but I found out he was Mahbub Ulaq's younger brother.
Okay.
And I said, I got a job for you. I won't pay you anything. You design a mosque and a kind of a signboard for this graveyard, which he did. It designed it out of brick, burnt brick.
Burnt brick, yeah.
And, lo and behold, after 40 years, I got a message from him the other day from Boston. He said, I've read your book and I want to keep in touch with you. I'm the person who designed that mosque. So I said, I still remember you and I still want to thank you for what you did for us. So anybody who does a good turn for you, never forget about it.
No, certainly. Babar Sahab, moving next to the India-Pakistan relationships, something you've been talking very openly on all forums. So when you left for your higher education, you left an Indian passport from Hindustan. You came back to Pakistan.
On the same Indian passport?
On the same Indian passport. When did you hear about this partition and what was your first reaction?
I got a message from my brother-in-law, Abid Hussain. This is Abida's father. He was a member of the Central Assembly, the parliament in Delhi. And in February of 47, he said, I think we will get Pakistan. That was sort of the first smell. And then the whole thing started rolling. Mountbatten came, discussions with the political leaders of India and Pakistan and the new interim government and everything else. And then finally on 3rd of June, it was declared that Pakistan would be there.
And then how was your reaction?
Oh, well, we were full of it because I was a die-hard Muslim leaguer at that time, and I was addressing public meetings in America, well, not public, but selective meetings, Rotary clubs and things like that in America. They were very keen to know about foreign countries at that time. There were very few foreigners in America during the war. So I would go and tell them that I'm from India, but we are working for Pakistan, a new country for the Muslims and all that.
Yeah, excellent. But you also then started working on improving India-Pakistan relationships.
Yeah.
You started many projects, and one of the projects is actually Balusa.
Yeah.
Tell us about that project.
Balusa
and the vision behind this project.
Balusa was not my creation. There was a number of senior bureaucrats and diplomats and some people, Pakistanis who were living abroad. They felt that there was need to bring the two countries together, at least discuss political issues, trade issues and things like that. So I was invited to be a part of that group, and they had meetings. These were originally sponsored by, whether it was Ford Foundation or somebody, it was funded by some outside agency.
Okay.
And they would only pay for, I paid for my own travel, but local hospitality wherever these meetings were held. And so that was a very interesting kind of thing. And then I took the initiative. I said, I will host these meetings at LUMS. And we had two meetings where we had Indian participants coming over and staying in REDC, and our Pakistanis also. But today the environment is not conducive to this kind of a effort.
But you think it will be in the future?
Has to be. I keep on telling my Indian friends that you can change history, you can't change geography. We have to live with each other. And it doesn't only apply to India, it applies to Afghanistan, it applies to
all our neighbors.
To Iran particularly, Nepal. Then we set up another organization which was originally sponsored by UN. It was called SASEP, South Asia Center for Economic Policy, consisting of India, Pakistan, Bangladesh, Nepal, Sri Lanka, and I was sort of from Pakistan on that. And knowing the local suspicion on foreigners, I asked them, I said, let the head office be in India. And I said, they said, what about Pakistan? I said, you would be chased by the intelligence agencies all the time, so have it away from Pakistan. So we had it in India. our demand on India was that they should treat us as an international organization. The Indians said any money that comes to you should come through the government of India, and we didn't. So then we moved it to Bangladesh. Bangladesh said that they would accommodate us. There again, for 3 or 4 years we were there, and the Bangladeshi bureaucracy again was dragging its feet. So finally the Nepalese said that we will welcome you. So we moved it to Nepal for 3 or 4 years. And I was one of the main funders of that setup in Nepal. And it didn't require too much money. It required maybe 10,000 euros a year to run the secretariat. But it brought people together from all the countries, so especially economists, policymakers. And we had very good, I mean, even today I can pick up a telephone and talk to all the top policymakers in India, Bangladesh, Sri Lanka. Unfortunately, the Sri Lankan has died, but in Nepal. So it's a good relationship, but then it ran out of money.
It also produced quite a few papers and policy documents.
Lot of how to have trade between this and
absolutely
and communication and trade and takeaway duties and all that. They produced a lot of documents, and Bangladeshis had done a lot of work on that.
On this beautiful note, Babar Sahab, thank you very much for your time. I went to a nursery school which was co-education. I fell in love with the girl at the age of 4. So
You've answered my question.
I traced her after 40 years and knew where she was.
What advice would you give to young parents now?
Leave their teachers alone.
Jesus.
At Stanford, you have this honor system. If you are found cheating, you're out of the university.
And they don't have invigilators either.
Why can't we have it here? I'm fighting with LUMS all the time. They said we get students from HSN who cheat.